Good morning. Good morning. The political hustings, political rah-rah. Last night, I had the opportunity to attend the final Conservative leadership hustings. Hustings is a funny word, but basically it means a political event whereby it has a much deeper meaning, but essentially it's the opportunity for two politicians to stake their claim in this instance, to put their case across in order to be nominated for or voted or elected, if you can use those terms, we'll come back to that, to be the new Conservative Party leader and therefore, in this case, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So I had the opportunity to attend the hustings last night as an independent media representative through Elevate Media. It's the first time I've ever been to a major political event that isn't an activist rally, and of which 2020 was the first time I'd participated in any major political activism through what I've spent the last couple of years doing when it comes to the COVID story. But last night was a very different experience. It's clearly set up by the Conservatives for the Conservatives. There was no expectation that, or maybe I did have an expectation that some of the messaging, some of the conversation would be for a broader appeal. But really, the setup was both speakers were introduced one by one. They gave their opening gambit, their kind of pitch, if you will, individually, and then both had questions posed to them by Nick Ferrari from LBC. So it was I was deeply curious about the event prior to attending. As I mentioned, I'd never been to anything like this. The moment, it was just, I'll just be real with you, it's a totally bizarre experience for a start. It was at Wembley Stadium. I'm dialing in here from my hotel just around the corner from the event. And walking in, it's got all of the Conservative branding everywhere. There's like one side of the room has got Sunak's crew selling merchandise. Who buys political merchandise? And then on the other side of the room, there's Truss and her table, her people, and their merch and their banners and their placards and their messaging. So you had both ends of the initial corridor with these stands, people handing out material, flyers, trying to sell hats, T-shirts, mugs, and all kinds of things. Just to me, it was just a very bemusing and confusing experience. And, a real mix of people attending, quite a diverse crowd, quite an older crowd in general, although quite a few young people there, which was interesting to see in terms of their engagement. And it felt a little bit like back in the day when I worked in corporate. It felt quite corporate when I walked in. They were trying to create this kind of fun, energetic environment. It's kind of like if any of our American friends came over and went to that, if they've ever been to an American political rally, it would probably feel like one of the American rallies, but a light version. And in some ways, it was a bit of a taste. You see the big Democrat and Republican rallies, huge stadiums full of people cheering like a sport. I find it very odd. I've never been aligned to a particular political party. I've literally in my adult life voted for the Reds, the Blues, the Greens, and the Yellows, depending on whatever the individual put forward as a set of ideas and to what level of congruence I believe they had as a leader, which often was very minimal. But naively at the time thought voting would make a difference. So I didn't walk into that event feeling any allegiance to the party, and I never have. But obviously the people there are paid members of the party, so they are fans effectively, and it does have that kind of theatrical nature whereby there is like really raving fan culture there. Had their placards, vote Rishi or vote Truss, and that was the kind of the Americanism of it that I'd never experienced or never really seen. I hadn't really seen any of the footage of any of the other political hustings prior to this event. And I don't really feel it necessary to kind of go into what each individual said. The key point was that clearly they are playing to the crowd, and their opening speeches were different, but ultimately they were using conservative platitudes to kind of, I mean, Truss opening up, I was just like, right, okay. She's just literally strung together a whole bunch of sound bites and platitudes that resonate with the audience. You know, you're not there to win a debate between each other. You know, it's a presentation. There's a independent grilling. It's not like the TV screen debates. So they're basically just using the buzzwords to try and like hit the buttons of the crowd in order to win the final vote. So it's a very strange experience. You know, it didn't feel very real. And this is the interesting point, because the opening, I arrived just as it started, and I missed the open. I forgot that I didn't catch who was presenting the opening comments, but they were talking about the need for character and how, you know, it's the character of the leader that makes the difference. And those are powerful words. It's however, what we've obviously witnessed in British politics for some time is the absence of character. And by character, I'm not talking charisma, charismatic character. I'm talking about depth of ethics, morals, strength of character. And what came through was a lack of congruence. And there's been some really interesting studies where, in the American political realm in particular, where they've looked at the level of congruence that the politician have with their words, actions, and deeds as they put themselves forth as with their manifestos. And there is a correlation between those who are most congruent in what they say and do, who typically win the elections. Now, with both of these characters, I felt a real distinct lack of congruence within Liz Truss, particularly in the fact that she was playing to the crowd. I felt that she was saying what she feels she has to say, but I almost sensed that within her there is something else. There is a more authentic self within her that actually, to me, would be far more powerful to witness. And that's no endorsement of Truss. I'm just saying, as an assessment of someone's character, I feel like we need an age of authenticity, realism, relatability. And by realism, you know, I'm not being, you know, just mundane about this. We need some idealism as well as vision here now. But I just felt there was a disconnect. Now with Sunak, having that much sleep, Sunak, with Rishi Sunak, similar, but not to the same degree. You know, he gave a real heartfelt thanks to his family for putting up with the last couple of years, and it actually felt genuine. You know, it felt there was a genuineness to which came across with a degree more authenticity than Truss. And all of my assessments are based upon a temporary glimpse into something. But once again, it's all the same political posturing that underpins it. And no matter what issues they talked about, and there'll be lots of people on social media, Twitter, debating what they said and what they didn't say, what issues gave a priority and what they didn't. And I could go into that, but actually, I don't think it's important for this conversation. There's a lot of the emphasis that I find peculiar and worrying, and how I would like to see things different, where there's an opportunity for change politically. And again, I appreciate that it was a conservative focused event and they are speaking to conservative members. However, there was a lot of talk about reuniting the Conservative Party, and of course that may be an important requirement given what's happened the last couple of years and people resigning and the divisions and whatnot. From a you know, you would want a stable government, yes, but would that be the primary message that you'd want to hear in the context of the chaos in the external realm right now, with literally by people predicting annual energy bills to get to something over like £6,000 a year by January next year, and inflation spiraling out of control, going into double digits, the economic growth stagnating, various, on top of everything that we've just gone through the last couple of years, which, by the way, was basically not even mentioned, swept under the carpet. So reuniting the party might be important to the Conservatives. And again, I know it was a Conservative event, but given that the media are there and it's live streamed, surely there was a more important message that could come across. And then the other piece, which is even more concerning, and again, having pre-framed that I have no political loyalties, it doesn't matter who they're taking shots at, but there was so much emphasis placed upon the idea of defeating Labour, defeating Keir Starmer, defeating Sadiq Khan in London. It was the London event. They were talking about the London mayor, Labour mayor. But I don't understand the importance of that. I can't get my head around it. I can't get my head around how that's a priority. And what does that even mean? Defeating your political opponent. How does that actually manifest? Like, what does that show up as? Getting one up on someone? I don't really understand the emphasis. How do you measure defeating your political opponent? Is it just doing the opposite of what they say? I don't really understand the meaning behind that. And again, it felt like this political rah-rah, this kind of sporting, like Reds versus Blues, Blues versus Reds. And, some of you may belong to political parties. You may have an affiliation to Labour or Conservatives or Lib Dems or whoever, Greens, whoever else. And you may have a sense that you may resonate more with that sentiment. But for me, as someone who's relatively politically neutral, I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't get how that's a political priority to defeat the opponent when the job of the politicians is to serve the public. So in the military, they have this concept known as the red team. And the red team, their job is to scrutinize all of the strategic decisions that the military make in order to minimize loss of life, in order to make sure that, mission critical decisions aren't made in a faulty manner. So their job is to scrutinize. But ultimately, in the sense of doing that, even though it may be hard for the leaders to have their work scrutinized to such a degree, if someone has ego attached to their decisions, etc., it can feel uncomfortable to be challenged in such a way. We're all human. Ultimately, in that context, within the military context, when you have the red team, and the businesses use this concept and analogy as well. Ultimately, when they do that, they're on the same team. They're working towards the same set of outcomes, but the red team in that instance is to make sure that they don't make mission critical mistakes. And in my view, we've lost sight of that, really. To me, the political opposition, if you will, shouldn't be seen as opposition. It should be seen as that kind of red team. And forget the colours, because I know you think then Conservatives, Labour, blah, blah. But the principle should be that whatever party you belong to, you're working in the interests of the people. And actually, if that means collaborating with fellow politicians across parties, which we see in Scandinavia, where there's a much more unified approach to politics, and unsurprisingly, they have the highest scores on the democracy, they have the highest happiness rating, they have the highest, prosperity and health ratings in the world. They do things differently. And even when it comes to our political system, England, it's the only country, democratic country across Europe that still plays the first past the post. We don't have, representative systems. It's to me, it is all theatre to some degree, and within that theatre, again, when pushed on specific policies, neither would really comment. Again, Sunak, I'm not showing Sunak favoritism here, but he did come up with better answers when it came to specific issues. But again, it was only a limited amount of time, a limited amount of issues with really little opportunity to actually dive into specifics. And neither were really wanting to play their cards and that's the game of politics, because if they show their cards, they potentially show vulnerability and weakness, because it gives their opponent two people on the same team, but this is even more crazy, two people on the same team fighting it out for the leadership position, they potentially give away something that could create weakness that their adversary could jump upon. So it was very tactical. It was very mute, really. Both really just using platitudes to try and appease the audience. I was kind of hoping to be pleasantly surprised and catch something that gave me just an element of inspiration or hope or optimism around the challenges that we're facing right now, and whether one of these leaders could bring something different. I'm not so sure. On the night, if it was a boxing match, to continue using the scoring analogy, personally, I would have given more points to Sunak versus Truss. And again, this is not an endorsement or support. I know people can take things out of context and said, Dan said this, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm just saying on the night, based upon what they said, this person came out, in my view, better than the other. But that doesn't mean that they are any different from what we've experienced. There was talking, I mentioned about ethics and character, there was talk about employing an ethics advisor for the government. An ethics advisor, if you've reached the depths of, or the lows of morality where you need to hire someone to keep your ethics in check, there's a fundamental problem in the system, and there's a fundamental personnel problem. If you need to have someone that's only paid to monitor ethics, then there is something wrong. If you hire people with ethics and morals, whilst everyone is human and makes mistakes, you don't need someone drawing the line on ethics. So it's bemusing. It's bemusing. Political rah-rah, absolutely. Political theatre, absolutely. I don't know to what extent people had already cast their votes. I know quite a lot of the MPs have been posting on social media saying who they support and what decisions are made. No one really knows who the 160,000 Conservative members are. There's no transparency. There's lots of fake members. We don't know who's who when it comes to voting or how it all works. It's all very hidden. It's not very democratic, and the Conservatives have been challenged on their lack of openness and transparency on the process. And what a surprise, they haven't come forth with any information. And actually, it may go to judicial review. That's a very interesting development. But I've just scratched the surface, really, yesterday of the political game. I've only ever observed from the outside, and it felt like a very different world on the inside. And it's restored my belief that if we want to create political change, then politics has to become personal. A lot of people yesterday were questioning why I was going to a Conservative hustings in the comments. Perhaps they're Labour followers or whatnot. I don't know. I wasn't going there as a member. I was going there as a member of the media. But nonetheless, I think it's really important to actually understand what's happening in our political system in the United Kingdom. The reality is we live in an allegedly democratic society. But the problem is that the political party membership is one thing. There's 160,000 Conservative members who are going to decide upon the fate of our nation, certainly for the next couple of years, unless it gets forced to a general election, which is a possibility. Where are the millions of where is everyone else? If we want things to change, then we have to create influence. And almost every video I record now, and I agree with the sentiment, people are talking about the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, the globalists, and they're absolutely right. The level of influence that these groups, and it's not limited to the WEF, there are many other groups like the WEF, they just seem to be the ones that are the most high profile because they have the most prolific marketing materials maybe, but they represent the wealthiest individuals, the largest multinationals, and the WEF in particular, through their kind of stakeholder capitalism, and we'll do some videos, I'll do some content breaking down some of these concepts so we can actually look at them in individual parts. But the whole purpose of the WEF is really a trade club for the world's largest organizations. And through stakeholder capitalism, forming public-private partnerships, essentially what that means is greasing the wheels through politics to enable business to continue to prosper and thrive in these environments. And this is happening on a local, a national political realm, but also in international politics. That's why we've seen them through the WEF in particular, again, have made formal partnerships with the United Nations. And that buys organizations like the WEF enormous power politically, globally, and nationally. And of course, by nature of their organization, by the nature of the access to the world's media, they get to shape the narrative effectively. They even had an event last year called The Great Narrative or The Grand Narrative. I don't remember the specific title. So it's important to recognize that these mechanics are playing out, yes, but it is also important to recognize that challenging that undue influence is a political problem. And on one hand, we've got major corporations who are acting in self-interest by pushing, lobbying, infiltrating governments in order to make commerce easier, because ultimately that's what it's really about. Although, commerce, the level of commerciality often comes with a level of desire for control and influence, and that's all part of it. But ultimately, the national political realm should be gatekeepers when it comes to those outside influences. So we have to recognize the importance of the national political system in actually curbing the influence of any bodies like WEF or any other related body or any other philanthro-capitalist, whoever. And at this moment in time, the system is it's built to maintain the status quo and continue to serve those interests. And many of those interests are enabled not just through interpersonal influence, but through policy, through treaties, through actual legislation. And particularly at the global level, there is a number of key economic treaties that have enabled all of this to happen. But it's been a course set in motion for 60 odd years with specific reference to the WEF. So this becomes a big part of the conversation. But we have to recognize that on one hand, the major corporations have been advancing their power, influence, and control into this, which has created this almost neo-feudal environment whereby we used to live in an age of empires, of kings and queens, and they had all the influence, money, and power. And it's changed throughout history, from monarchs to the role of religious institutions, and the power centers have moved over time. But now it's the glass towers. Now it is the big business. They are the new kings, and they have been advancing their power for a long time. But simultaneously, whether by design or otherwise, citizenry, the public, have let go of power, if they ever even had it, the illusion of power. But the reality is the political system is supposed to govern the interests of the nation. That includes the people and of every spectrum, of every end of the wealth spectrum. But if public participation in politics is at this level of a low, then what can we actually expect? It's easy to go on social media and comment about the WEF and what they're doing. But what does that translate into when it comes to action? So I felt a bit aggrieved yesterday that I was getting some grief, and it may have just been Labour fans. Because I was in the blue camp for the day. But if we want change, we have to take it on. We have to tackle this. And no amount of just saying no and having a big walkout for the WEF is going to change anything. They have enormous power and influence over politics. And if we want politics to be a defender of sovereignty, then we have to influence it, and we can't step away from it. We can't say it's all theatre and a charade. Well, it may be, but it ain't going to change itself. My greatest frustration with all of this is that we have the lowest level of active political participation in perhaps history, yet people are dissatisfied, but they're all looking for it feels like everyone is looking for someone else to take on the problem without recognizing that you are the solution. Our participation is what creates the change. Politics has to become personal. It has to be different from what I experienced in that room last night. It has to be about people like you and I thinking about, how do we do things differently? How do we do things differently? How do we see the world for what it is? How do we find what's most important in terms of problems to solve? And then how do we locate the existing solutions that are already out there and start to amplify, enable, and fortify those solutions, whether it's food security, energy supply, whatever it may be. What do we do to enable people to live the good life? To me, politics is intrinsically linked with philosophy. It should be about, how do we live a good life? How do each one of us live a good life? How does each one of us have the opportunity to flourish, live a healthy, prosperous, joyful existence, and to do so in harmony with each other and the world that we live in? Is that so hard? It's not that hard when we take responsibility for it. But at the moment in time, and yes, we can blame the media, we can blame the setup, we can blame the system, which is all very, very understandable, because it's very real. But the more we point fingers and blame, we sit in the seat of the victim, and we give away our agency. We give away our own personal responsibility to say, you know what, no matter what the media show me, I am sovereign in my own being. I will make my own assessment. I will make my own decisions. But not only will I make my own decisions, I'll take responsibility for my life and for the community I live in and for the country I live in and for the world I live in. Because it's very easy to continue to point fingers, but until one looks in the mirror and says, what am I actually going to do about this? Nothing changes. So yes, there is a massive problem of global influence of unelected bodies, but they have influence in a multitude of ways. There's many tentacles to the global system, and one of them is politics, national politics. So if we want to get big money and big influence out of politics, guess what? We've got to intervene. Now, there are multiple ways you can do that through the existing systems, always worthwhile doing, but also in building parallel structures, building a shadow government if that's deemed to be a solution, building localized solutions. Sovereignty comes with freedom comes with responsibility, as does sovereignty. And ultimately, right now, we have to become empowered. We have to become awake to the world in which we live, to awaken from our slumber and to recognize that this is the matrix and that when we get uncomfortable and experience the realities of what's happening in the world, it does become uncomfortable. And for a lot of people, that discomfort puts people back in their shell in order to go back to living their lives, hoping that the problem will go away or someone else will take care of it. Unfortunately, these problems don't go away by themselves, and there is no savior. There is no individual hero or leader who's going to come and solve all the problems. It's the responsibility of each one of us who have a level of frustration or dissatisfaction with the state of the world to make it our duty and responsibility to affect change in any small way around us. So yes, politics may be a charade. It may be theatre. It may not offer any solutions. It might do, it might not. Either way, politics is supposed to serve the interests of people. And until people start to play the game again, nothing will change. At the moment, all of the players that we need to be on the field are off the pitch. So it's time to get back on the field in one sense. And in the other sense, it's time to design a new game. It's time to design a new game that people want to play. Because if the game itself is not attracting people to be part of it, then, well, let's get to work designing a new game. and thinking about how things are done differently in our localities, in our regions, in our municipalities. How do we self-organize? How do we do things differently? How do we do things that serve the interests of everyone and not the few? You know, this is absolutely critical. So yes, we have to get close to the edges and peer inside the mechanics of the world that we believe to be broken if we want to change it. And you know, we have to be willing to get uncomfortable. Ultimately, I was uncomfortable in that world last night, putting myself in that space, but I wanted to understand it. I wanted to see it. I wanted to experience it. I wanted to feel it viscerally. And yeah, I've shared my reflections, but ultimately, the only person we need to influence right now is ourselves. People are always saying, what do we do to wake others up? Well, if you're already awake, the next step is to become empowered and to take action. Because by becoming awake, becoming empowered, and being a visible role model for change, you will affect other people. You will inspire others. The reality is, right now, that there are enough people who see the problems in the world that if they were just to come together and to individually get out there and recognize that there are already plenty of solutions that have been built over the decades that just need support, then those things can grow and become stronger. Not any one of us needs to come up with the answers ourselves. Many of the answers are already out there. I always use the metaphor, the answers are in the room. We just got to get out there and share them. Get out there, amplify them, get out, enable them, fortify them. It's a game of influence at this point in time. But in order to influence, one has to already understand how to influence oneself, meaning we've got to tap into their own power within ourselves to make a difference. A lot of people are feeling powerless right now. They're feeling alienated. That's got to change. There's got to be a sense of inner certainty, inner power, inner connection, and a sense of belonging to a group of people who are inspired to go out there and make a difference when the whole world seems to be crumbling around them. In those situations, people need to bring certainty and clarity to the madness in order to offer a path ahead. And if anyone is waiting for that person to come, you're not looking in the right place. You need to look in the mirror. It's you. It's you and I. It's people who are willing to get uncomfortable, to bring certainty to an uncertain world. And that's hard. It's challenging. It's scary, but it's also exhilarating. It's also motivating. It's also something that comes with deep meaning and purpose. And the reality is, when we get to a point where we can paint a dream, paint a vision for a brighter tomorrow or a more beautiful world that we know is possible in the world of the words of Charles Eisenstein, then the reality is, once we see it in our mind, we just have to step into it and live it. Now, that might sound esoteric, but the reality, living a good life, feeling joy, happiness, energy, peace, harmony, abundance, all of these things are available to us instantly. But we live our lives in this bubble of stress, struggle, sacrifice, when all of those things are flourishing is available to us instantly when we claim our power. And when we claim our power and we begin to thrive, then we can create influence in the world around us. So politics, to me, is an inside job. It's an inner game. It's a personal game. And it's one that we must all begin to play if we want to see things changing. We can't just point fingers at what other people are doing. The old adage in business is that don't spend your time trying to knock down someone else's tower, build your own. And if you use that mentality, if you want a better system, let's build it. If you want to play a different game, let's create it. We can't just sit on the sidelines. I spent the first half of 2020 sitting on the sidelines watching the world unfold, feeling increasingly dissatisfied with the world I was witnessing unfolding. It took a point where it just got to a bursting point and said, I need to be an active participant in change. And I made the decision to step up, and I haven't sat down since, metaphorically. Although just by how tired I am, probably haven't sat down enough physically. So in summary, yes, it was an interesting experience being part of the hustings yesterday. Will change come as a result of the new Prime Minister coming into power? I think there'll be some change. Maybe there will be greater unity amongst the political party, the Conservative Party, and maybe will that get the House in order and actually do something? I don't know. Who knows? But ultimately, if we want to see change, it's down to us to create it. And on that point, in order to continue to inspire that change, we're going to get out on the road soon and create our own little non-political political tour. Starting on Tuesday in Bristol next week, we're having a pilot event, small, up to 50 people, where we're going to share a message of inspiration, I hope, which will get people to think differently about politics and think differently about how each one of us can thrive and flourish and live a good life, and how by doing so we can influence the world around us and creating a brighter future. So ultimately, if we want a brighter future, the message is simple. It's in our hands to create it. So watch this space. Come and join us on the tour. If you're in Bristol or near Bristol and you want to come and join us next week, we'll be putting up the registration page later today. In the meantime, if you come and join us inside the Elevate Network, it's our private community. We'll be posting details there later on first up inside the network. So you can go to weareelevate.org. Alternatively, if you don't want to be part of an online community, then you can just join our mailing list at danastingregory.com/podcast. And we'll be circulating the details of our events that will be coming up. We have planned to get across all of the UK by the end of the year and start to send a message that we can raise the nation when we take responsibility for doing so. So enjoy your day. This was maybe a short 10-15 minute reflection. Classic 40 minutes later. Time to get some work done. All right. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in. For those of you in London tonight, I'll be at the Together first year anniversary do in Westminster. Last year, I helped co-found the Together Declaration, co-author the Together Declaration, which stood against vaccine passports and vaccine mandates in the UK. Together are about to hit their they've just hit their 1 year anniversary, and tonight's a celebration of that. So if you're attending, do come and say hi. I'll be recording some more content around the evening, and we'll keep you updated. And have a great day. All right, I'm going to go get some coffee and get my day started.